Thank you for joining our panel discussion today. My name's Aoife Connaughton. I'm a Director of Climate and Sustainability Practice at Deloitte here in Dublin. Today we'll be discussing how can green and circular business models provide practical solutions to the transition to net zero, regenerative and purposeful value chains. I'm joined today by a fantastic panel who each have a different perspective to bring on the circular economy. We've Brendan Vidal Edgerton, who's the Director of Circular Economy at World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Angela Francis, who's the Chief Advisor of Economics and Economic Development at WWF, and Adam Mitchell-Heggs, who's the co-founder of Net Positive Labs. Brendan, Angela, Adam, could I ask each of you to just give a brief introduction to yourselves and to the work of your organisations? Brendan, you might want to kick off.
Sure, of course. Thank you for the opportunity. So my name is Brendan Edgerton. I'm the Director of Circular Economy for WBCSD. For those less familiar with WBCSD, we're a global CEO-led organization of over 200 leading businesses working together to accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. Our mission is to accelerate the transition to a sustainable world by making more sustainable businesses more successful. And our vision is to create a world in which 9 billion people can live well within the means of the planet by 2050. And we target the realization of this vision 2050 and the Sustainable Development Goals through 6 work programs to achieve this system transformation necessary. And one of those is on the circular economy. In our circular economy program today, we operate more than a dozen work streams and engage more than half of WBCSD's membership through 4 projects: Factor 10, Plastic and Packaging, the Circular Electronics Partnerships, and CE Hub. Continue to see the momentum and interest in circular economy grow, not only within our membership, but with the business community abroad.
Thanks, Brendan. Angela, would you like to give an intro?
Thanks, Aoife. A pleasure to be here. Really glad to be joining the conference. I'm Angela. I'm an economist at WWF, and everybody will know our conservation work. But I'm also in the team because WWF work on the drivers of climate change and nature loss. So I look at economic systems, how we produce, what we consume, and we work with businesses on that a lot. So WWF has a number of partnerships, and the best ones really are the partnerships where businesses are going through a transformative change themselves. They're addressing a big environmental challenge in their own sector, and they work with us to scale that in the country or the sector they work in. So I'm going to spend my time today talking about what I think is going to be most interesting for those partnerships in the next 10 years, which is around innovation and just transition.
Brilliant. Thanks, Angela. And Adam.
Hi, Adam Mitchell-Heggs here. I'm very happy to be here with Brendan and Angela. I'm a co-founder of Net Positive Labs. We're a multimodal organization that's looking to accelerate global transition towards a more circular world. And we do this through concept development through our Knowledge Hub. We want to build a series of startups through our venture lab, both with internal associate entrepreneurs, as well as with companies and with cities as well. And also we want to help organizations, whether it's companies, whether it's cities, whether it's public organizations, transition to a more sort of circular practices. And we do this through a combination of education, simulations, boot camps, masterclasses, and all kinds of, just concept development on that side. We currently work with quite a few sort of associate entrepreneurs and researchers on our own internal sort of agenda, as well as collaborating with several companies on creating new ventures.
Brilliant, thanks, Adam. So just to kick off the conversation today, Brendan, I have an opening question for you. So you mentioned how WBCSD, you have this brilliant vision of 9 billion people living in a world where we're living within the boundaries of the planet. Could you explain a bit more about the role of the circular economy in this and kind of what value it can bring to business and society?
Yeah, of course. One of the best ways to understand circular economy is probably just by looking at the linear economic model that we operate in today. So since the Industrial Revolution, our economic focus has been about producing as much as possible, as quickly as possible to satisfy growing demand. And while this growing demand has meant that generally more people had access to higher qualities of life, this economic model failed to account for the costs it placed on the environment. And so what we see is this take waste model that we also call the linear economic model is just simply not sustainable. And we see this manifested already today in air pollution, land use change, increasing greenhouse gas emissions, waste in our ocean, contaminants leaching into soils, and adverse health impacts for humans. And we're already seeing this again manifested through climate change, This is tied to the rapid species loss and biodiversity issue we see today, and ultimately the limitations to resources that we have here on Earth. We only have so much. So what we look at is circular economy. We talk about it as a tool. It's both ancient and novel that allows us to reconsider how we can produce and consume in a way more aligned with the natural systems in which people and the economy require. So in nature, there is no waste. So in our economy, why should there be any waste either? We create real value for society and economy through by implementing a circular economy. We can create real value for both business and government, as well as civil society, by minimizing how much we depend on extraction and non-sustainable resource use. And we use things as long as possible. And ultimately, when they can't be used anymore, returning those resources back into the economy instead of landfilling or burning them. Now, businesses recognize today this $4.5 trillion economic opportunity that's been thrown around for years now. But we see that businesses are understanding this mindset shift allows them to meet shareholder and customer demands much more in line with the limitations of our planet. We found that businesses generally recognize that there's 8 different business cases for circularity activities across 3 categories. One, that it allows them to continue the growth of the company. It improves or enhances their competitiveness, and it also mitigates risk. So on top of this, as I mentioned, the effects of our linear economic model with climate change, moving towards a more circular economy enables us to reduce up to 39% of the emissions gap that we need in order to achieve that 1.5 degree scenario. So as I mentioned, also today, biodiversity and nature have shot up the agenda, right behind there, right there with climate. And we will see, continue to see a number of studies coming out that make this very tangible link. Now, bottom line, when business cases are considered alongside these positive environmental effects, the true value of a more circular economy is quite obvious. And we can't fool ourselves into believing that we can continue to extract and dispose and landfill and burn limited resources in perpetuity. We just don't have endless amounts of land, air, and water to do that. There are countless examples already of how business, governments, and individuals are already putting circular economy in practice today all over the world. However, we need these actions and ambitions to be scaled up quickly to see the circular performance much more on the order of magnitude of 86% global circularity instead of the 8.6 global circularity we see ourselves at today.
And on that, Brendan, so at WBCSD you have these circular economy programs bringing together some of your members who are these large multinationals who are kind of really innovating and blazing a trail in this area. What kind of, from that work to date, are there any kind of key lessons or key learnings or key reflections that will be useful to share with the audience that's going to help other organizations on that journey?
Absolutely. One of the first things process, the circular economy is going to mean something slightly different to each company. And that's okay. Companies are at all different levels of circularity and maturity, depending on industry, value chain position, the regional economy in which they operate. There are certain constraints, certain priorities into what they might want to focus in within circularity in order to become more aligned with environmental objectives. There are also limits to how much a company can become circular on its own, even for the world's biggest companies. And we see this popping up a lot today, is to achieve true circularity, a company has to work with its value chain and its key stakeholders to, starting at design and manufacturing more circular products and services, to extending the lifetime of products and working with consumers and take-back agencies. And then lastly, on closing the loop on those products, components, and materials, and ensuring that they're given another life and not disposed of. So we see, again, challenges that may be different for various companies depending on which value chain they're operating in. However, we see some of the similar challenges that fall under 4 different categories. The first is policy and regulation. And here, there are many policies that we'll talk about innovation a little bit later, that requires some new thinking and actually more coordination across different agencies to allow more circular solutions to be scaled up. Finance and investment is another way where we've been kind of entrenched in this linear economy. And there's some adaptations to accounting and ways that we look at value that will enable more circularity in the private sector. Another big component of this is individual consumers and behavior change. Getting people to move away from single use or to look at how to use things longer is going to be a big hurdle in making sure that we achieve a more circular economy. And then lastly, on information and data, there's not a whole lot of understanding of the resource flows or the product availability up and down the value chain. That information isn't exchanged or readily available. And on this front, one of the biggest hurdles companies expressed to us early on in WBCSD's circular economy journey was the need for a consistent methodology for companies to measure their circular performance and to do so of their products, their services, business units, and overall enterprise. So, through our circular economy program and with more than 30 companies and counting, we produced the circular transition indicators. We first published this in January of 2020, published the second version earlier this year, and we continue to work with companies on collecting feedback and adding new indicators of framework, as well as the online free CTI tool. And today, there are hundreds of companies using CTI to assess their circularity and using it to engage other departments internally, gain buy-in from internal decision makers, or to inform customers and investors. So, this is one of those tangible activities that we've taken as WBCSD to work with our members to respond to one of these consistent challenges that we've seen on this information and data transferability.
Thanks, Brendan. It's so interesting. I think we'll come on to Angela maybe after Adam, but I think, you see a lot of similarities there with the, really the value of convening organizations and the need to collaborate across supply chains. I think that's where, the NGO space is just so important in driving this transition, and it really is impossible to do it without those close business partnerships with business. And so it's super, super interesting. And Adam, I suppose a lot of your work kind of builds on the challenges and the opportunities that Brendan mentioned. So you're working with, I suppose, both entrepreneurs and with existing organizations to try and create some of these circular business models and create some of these circular kind of ventures and opportunities. Could you tell us a little bit about, give us maybe some examples of some of the business models that you're exploring and how you feel that they're going to help this transition to a net zero and a net zero economy, and actually these kind of wider societal benefits that we know are possible with the circular economy?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, for us, we see that every organization, company, city, or public organization, academic institution, can both sort of reflect and look at their operations internally, their business models internally, their consumer models internally, and can also almost look externally at their organization and their ecosystem, because a huge amount of the waste and inefficiencies we find are, to the point before, a lack of collaboration or data sharing or information sharing, or willingness to collaborate on opportunities to reduce kind of these inefficiencies. So it's looking externally at your ecosystem and thinking, hey, as a player, as a stakeholder within this ecosystem, what is something that I can do? And the way that we sort of discuss what can be done with different organizations, it's the first step that you can do. Becoming net zero by 2040, 2050 is going to be a monumental task. It's kind of looking at how can we pragmatically, step by step, actually start achieving some of the small wins, and then eventually evolve to sort of starting to create these larger ecosystem transitions. What we sort of propose is an internal sort of circular transformation, which is a step-by-step journey where companies should start looking internally at their operational model from the different resources that they collect, the products that they design, their manufacturing process, their distribution process, the taking into consideration the end of life or the life cycle of the product. That they're providing to the different customers, and start already understanding how can one already improve this model. And we sort of help organizations across the journey from rethinking traditional business models, rethinking how traditional sort of supply chain can work, how the future might look like. And we look at the future as becoming more and more digital. It's becoming more and more orchestrated through platforms, and digital sort of ecosystems are connecting different players across. We want to help companies understand the power of collaboration. One of the topics that we're exploring and we're writing a little bit about at the moment is what we sort of term internally as co-opetition. Small organizations who compete on the product that you're marketing, but why aren't you collaborating on the sort of back end? Why aren't you sharing infrastructure for production, for distribution, for resource procurement, rather than doing price wars on your kind of like cost of manufacturing, cost of goods? Collaborate. You can reduce your costs, you can reduce the price, you can be far more efficient, you can use almost economies of scale. We encourage a strong use of Industry 4.0. We mentioned the first, second, and the third industrial revolutions are what help us do this mass production, mass consumption, and essentially sort of generate this perception of wealth, and actually created this habit, this behavior of consumption and unnecessary consumption, which kind of sort of drives this linear economy that Brendan was talking about. We find that Industry 4.0 used correctly could be one of the best arsenal of tools to help us counteract it, and use data, connectivity, and analytics to actually help us redesign the value chains to be more efficient. And then finally, engaging in change management. It's understanding that the world is changing, culture is changing, behavior is changing, and organizations have to look internally and externally at the people, and understanding the priorities of your workforce, your clients, your collaborators. More and more stakeholders have more skin in the game when it comes to the secondary effects, direct effects of climate, of waste that's kind of leaking into the ecosystem. So this is what we sort of look at on a circular transformation, kind of pushing around and redeveloping sort of business models, exploring how one can actually collaborate with other organizations to actually drive enormous efficiency, not to be afraid of redesigning, reimagining, rethinking, just reinventing how you collaborate with your suppliers, your distributors, and your clients, and how we can create new models. So that's more on the circular transformation side. And then on our circular venture side, this is where we sort of help companies kind of understand, okay, circular transformation is what you can do internally. Now let's see how we can create the different tools that can help address the problems of your ecosystem. If you are a company that's having your own sort of worries, concerns over distribution and operational efficiency over here, and kind of a large amount of waste around it, it's probably going to be the case that similar companies to you are also going to be suffering from the same problems. And we feel that this is a great chance to actually build solutions for the industry, for the ecosystem as a whole. And so on our venture building side, we sort of work with companies to understand what are the key inefficiencies and problems within an ecosystem, and how one can address that. And just to give an example of this, we're collaborating with a great venture studio in France, and we're working in the freight forwarding industry. And it's understanding, I can't get into too much detail, sadly, as we're under strict NDAs, but it's understanding how what are the key problems in the freight forwarding industry. And there's a huge amount of operational inefficiency that leads to a lot of unnecessary emissions, and the movement of goods from incredibly distant locations when it's not that necessary, as well as other inefficiencies such as this enormous amount of paper that's unnecessary in this industry. So we're working actually with a leading European port at the moment. We've assessed kind of the different inefficiencies that you can find within the freight forwarding market, and prioritize what are ones that aren't being addressed as importantly at the moment. And we looked in this area of how do we manage to contribute to reducing the amount of paper that's in the freight forwarding industry. And if you look at the billions of containers that go moving around, and each one has a contract associated with it, it's actually quite powerful. So
scale gets right along very quickly, doesn't it?
It's absolutely, if you just do the kind of unit economics of addition, it's insane. But yeah, no, so we're actually collaborating with stakeholders within the industry to actually help this transition towards more paperless. And there's lots of solutions around there and that are already emerging, but we're basically using principles of lean startup practices and as well as a methodology using a great tool called the Platform Innovation Kit to sort of help design kind of novel business models around this. Would love to go into more detail about it, but
I know we could talk all day, but actually it's really the point around innovation is really interesting. I think really ties into Angela's work as well. So, I said we hear a lot about the commercial case, obviously, for sustainable business and sustainable economies, and naturally when we're talking to business leaders, it's the thing everyone starts with, oh, give me the business case. Obviously the business case has been around for a long time, but Angela, one of your areas of work is really around the actual business logic for a just transition, not just the moral logic, but the business logic, and kind of the role of innovation in that. I'd just love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Aoife. And great to be on this panel because WWF don't often talk about circular economy, but I think it's one of the most interesting places where change is happening, because it's really, as Brendan and Adam were saying, really disrupting how we think about resources and measure resources. And that's going to be, I think, one of the most important changes we make to our linear economy or the current capitalist model is who owns stuff, how do we stop waste, how do we manage those resources so they don't get they get used well in giving us most value. So yes, exactly. For that's the kind of bit I'm interested in, and the reason I've kind of come to this topic, this innovation just transition topic, is the last couple of years I was on a couple of commissions. So there was a Green Innovation Policy Commission, which was run out of UCL, business-led commission looking at the particular challenges and opportunities around green innovation, that very policy-led space. And I was also on an Environmental Justice Commission, which was run by IPPR, Institute for Public Policy Research, and that was a cross-party academic business commission that was looking at how we do economic justice. And the link between them was really interesting. So I want to talk about that connection because I think it's something we don't talk about enough, and it's really going to be important in the next couple of years. And first, a couple of quick definitions, because I think these titles are often sort of fraught with misunderstanding. So by innovation, I don't mean R&D. Don't just mean R&D. I mean that whole chain from idea to commercialization. So ideas can be products, of course, but I think particularly in a circular economy context, there are also new practices and new business models. And at the end of the chain, that end of the chain is particularly important, that commercialization part, because that's really interesting for accelerating the transition to a net zero or circular and nature restored economy, because that's where a lot of the work happens and the cost reduction happens when the idea meets the customer. Idea meets reality. That's when we sort of start talking about how we're really going to make these things mainstream and how it's going to work in a very scalable way. And by just transition, yes, of course, I'm talking about that being fair for workers who are in the industries that are going through big changes. So food and farming, manufacturing, oil and gas, they're all at the coalface, if you don't mind the pun. They're the ones that are really going to experience lots of change. But also it's about a fair distribution of the costs and benefits. And I do mean benefits. There are huge benefits coming from this green economy, and we've got to make sure that everybody starts to feel those. And the big kind of justice things behind all of this is it's got to be fair for the developing countries who've had less contribution to this than the rest of us, and for the next generation who we can't leave this to. So it's about how we have to get on with it. So just transition has got all those things. And I say that because often just transition to some people means protecting industry from change. And it's not about that. It's about preparing industry for change and supporting those people who are affected through it. Nobody's really helped by sitting in a bubble. So when regulation and customer expectations and risk to your operations from climate change and nature crashes are all moving really fast, and you're asking to sort of, stop the world, I'd like to jump off. That's not helping you. Actually, what we need is help to get those people through that. So the link between the two, the link between that innovation and just transition thing is, I think, where these really exciting and important innovations are going to come from. And it's about sustainable business solutions that we're all talking about, but also solve the scaling and justice problem. And that means for me, building things that work for poorer and middle income countries, or SME businesses, if businesses are your customers, the businesses that are less able to kind of cope with this. And at the macro level, we know that investments in greening our economy are going to pay us back by avoiding the worst effects of climate change and nature loss. we get this return to productivity, we get benefits to health and well-being from all the big investments we make. And at individual level, that kind of is true too. So you have a lot of investments that have upfront costs and long-term benefits, or they're premium products which are, you know, more available at a kind of certain bits, cohorts of the market. So the richest households can invest in insulation and solar panels, heat pumps, and then they get the savings, or they can upgrade their car to an EV, and they got all the incentives from the cheaper road tax, and they get the designated parking spaces, and that's good. You know, we really want to encourage take up, and we want those who can buy to buy. But if this is going to be a shared endeavour and something we really scale, we've got to get the benefits of better housing and greener mobility to a bigger group of people. So thinking about how renters and people who don't own their car, people who've got less disposable income, how they see the benefits. So an example I would give, and it's not exactly in the same space, but it's the kind of thing that I think people can get hold of, is the Green Investment Bank. When it was operating in the UK, it found a way to enable local authorities who couldn't finance the upfront cost of converting their street lights to LEDs to fund that. And it did that by taking those stream of future savings that the local authority was definitely going to receive because it was paying the bill every year, that stream of future savings, and converting it, and it was called securitizing it, a way in the way you would securitize a stream of future receipts, and then using that to fund the upfront cost, and then the local authority could benefit from the savings, and it could make the scheme happen. So thinking about those types of things, how do you deal with all the extra complications that I know are in there for doing that kind of thing for people and communities? And I think that means financing, of course, but it also means changing business models, changing who owns things. And I think that's quite interesting from a circular economy perspective. I think one of the things it's going to mean is, if we're talking about housing, for example, like copper-bottomed government-backed guarantees for retrofits, so that poor and vulnerable families aren't worried about getting stranded with a badly done job. There's lots of things about building trust. How do people engage in a big investment? How do you build high trust contracts or maybe covenants? And this is like the ownership thing, so that renters could get, you know, energy efficient savings kit installed in their home, and it's regarded as an asset, not a liability by the landlord or the tenant. You know, you can't do things because you're not there for 15 years, but it's actually the things you're doing should be super beneficial for the next tenant and for the asset owner. But we don't have the mechanisms that people can feel really confident about that. So what I want to encourage businesses who are here today joining the conference to think about is, how do you make your business sustainable? Yes. How do you take forward new opportunities that open up for you? Yes. But also start thinking about how your offer can work for the poorest and middle income bits of society. I think that's the kind of big business thinking that businesses need to do together. And Adam hinted this a number of times in his presentation. Sectors need to get together in a pre-competitive space and work out, like, what is this going to look like? You know, a proliferation of models is just going to confuse people. How can we talk about this together, and then talk to government about what policy we need to make this kind of shift work? And these are the schemes I think that governments are really going to want to see. They know that the net delivery of net zero has got to work for people. And if you want to roll out at scale, you've got to build that confidence in an industry. And there's no point having a model that only works for a few. So I love that phrase, DNA of an elephant. Like you start with something small, but you build it with a way like this is how it's going to get big, even if you're starting small. So I'll stop there. But yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
No, that's fantastic, Angela. And I think you know, it's really interesting just to see even the connectedness and the overlap between all of your work, and actually just how the themes are so common. You know, it is all about big thinking, you know, creative thinking, actually bringing people together around the opportunities. You know, it's not about hitting people with a stick. There's such strong, compelling reasons on so many different levels, and actually it's just trying to understand, how do you get those people together on those levels to actually make this work? Because I think probably the biggest challenge, instinctively it makes sense with the right policy measures, with the right constructions, but actually the pace of change, you know, we're at that 8.6% that Brendan mentioned. You know, how do we massively accelerate this across industry and across business? And I suppose just maybe as kind of a key takeaway as we're finishing up, I'd be really interested to hear from each of you on kind of, you know, what's one thing you'd love to see from policymakers and from financing organizations, who I think both have key roles in accelerating this transition. And Brendan, do you have any key thoughts? One or two?
Well, I think in talking about innovation, you know, we often put them in two buckets: tangible and intangible. You know, the tangible innovations are, you know, the new technologies that are coming out that, are needed to move towards circularity. I think in terms of tangible, we probably have everything we need today in order to achieve a more circular society. It's those intangible innovations that we're woefully falling short on. And this is kind of what Angela and Adam touched on, in policy, in finance, in consumer behavior. How do we use behavioral economics to drive more sustainable consumption? And how can we reevaluate business models and adjust how finance and accounting look at the books in order to account for longer lifetimes and rethinking the idea of depreciation or complete drawdown. These are all the kind of more intangible innovations that we're really looking to drive in both the public sector, but also in finance and investors. So they create more of a facilitative environment for circular.
That's really insightful, Brendan. Adam, any thoughts on that kind of financing or policy level?
I mean, absolutely. And I think that there's enormous initiatives going on between, at the government level, regions, for example, exploring taxation based on UN SDG sort of agendas. A lot of investors, whether it's on the private equity or VC side, looking into integrating sustainability into it. But from what I'm seeing, there's just a lack of harmonization across the board. And I speak to companies and startups, and there's a lot of confusion as to what they need to show. Should I be a B Corp? Should I have should I be with SASB, GRI? Which circular economy sort of metrics should I be following? We've got these sort of harmonized principles with financial accounting, and something like this on the level for sustainability, including not just environmental sustainability, but economic sustainability too. Business models that do have a sort of long-term sort of life in them. And at the moment in the startup world, we're seeing a lot of business models which you kind of wonder if it's just a bubble that's relying on continuous investment from different LPs to keep it going. But probably in 10, 15 years, they will be non-functional, but already have disrupted so many sort of traditional business models, and leave a bit of a vacuum and cause more problems than they actually try to solve in the first place.
No, absolutely. I think that's absolutely spot on, Adam. And over to you, Angela, for the final remarks.
Yeah, thank you. Such an interesting panel. I think my takeaway is just, in these kind of disruptive models, it's scary. Sometimes disruption is scary. How do we make it less scary for the people who are going to be most worried? The thing I most fear is that the poorest in society, who will suffer most if we don't sort this out, are being used as a reason to slow down. And actually, they should be the reason we speed up. And we need to make sure that we focus the policies, get the jobs, the retraining, the less congested streets, the access to green space, all the savings need to think about ways that we get that to the people and places who need it most. And if we have that at the front of our minds, and we're not kind of slightly getting overexcited with our own tech and whatever, we need to talk about how does this work for people, because that's the thing that is stopping us starting, and that's the bit that I'd focus on. And it's a business thinking, but also policy to make that happen. And yeah, I'd love to speak to businesses who have been inspired by what they've heard and thinking about this, and would like to work with us, because this is where we're going to be spending our time.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Angela. I think it absolutely, how can we make this work for people? It's all about people at the end of the day. And guys, thanks so much for your time. Really, really interesting chat. And I think we could spend hours talking about this stuff. It's super exciting. But thanks again, and thanks for the work with each of your organizations too. I think it's so important, and it plays such a key role in really driving innovation and pace in this area.
Thank you. Thanks, Aoife.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.